It being 2 p.m, we'll move to question time, and I call Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, data released by debt monitoring firm Creditor Watch showed that the failure rate of Australian businesses rose to 5.04% in October, the highest since the peak of the COVID pandemic in October 2020, when the failure rate reached 5.08%. Annually, insolvency rates are now roughly 25% higher than they were prior to the pandemic. What responsibility does the Albanese government accept for the growing number of businesses going bust under its watch?
Thank you, Senator Canavan. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much, President. I thank Senator Canavan for the question, and we recognise and have since we came into government that there are a number of pressures facing small business, and that we have sought with our responses to particularly cost of living pressures and some of the issues around the energy transitions, that we needed to provide targeted support to small business. This issue did come up through estimates, and we talked about it at estimates as well, and that when you do look at it as the proportion of the number of businesses, which is growing over time, what we're seeing at the moment is not at a historical high, but I'm not saying that to dispute the fact that there are businesses under enormous pressure. We had $640 million in the last budget in practice. Well, I'm just putting some facts on the table. I know you like to argue that things, that this is the worst. But when you look at the facts don't support that. But as I have said in estimates, and as I'm saying today, when we brought in energy bill rebates for small business, you lot voted against them, despite that being a big issue that small business was telling us was an issue for them. So in this budget alone, we are providing support for small business with $640 million in the last budget in practical support, including the instant asset write-off and energy bill relief. This is an area we will continue to focus on to do what we can. I think there's another big piece of work in cyber in ensuring that small businesses are given the right support to deal with some of the cyber challenges that they are facing, but providing responsible and effective cost of living support for Australian small businesses is something that this government has done.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Canavan, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Minister, Australia's construction industry had the second highest business failure rate, with a 12-month average of 5.3%. The recent COSBOA report revealed that the cost of doing business and increasing red tape remain one of the biggest cost pressures amongst Australian businesses. Do you accept that the Albanese government's industrial relations reforms are playing any role in these increasing cost pressures and resultant insolvencies?
Thank you, Senator Canavan. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I accept that there's a view put by some in the business community who have not been supportive of our industrial relations amendments, which have supported significant employment growth and wages growth in the last 2 years. What we have seen is 1 million new jobs created, the most number of jobs that have been created in any term, in any parliamentary term, have been created under this government. We have seen— well, that's not correct, Senator McGrath. I take the interjection. That is absolutely not correct. I know you have the Coalition have a view about what are good jobs and what are not good jobs, but there have been 1 million jobs created and we have got wages going again. All of those things are good for business.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Canavan, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. Aside from red tape, businesses are grappling with the cost of living crisis, just like every other Australian household is. Record interest rates, sticky inflation, sky-high energy bills, record insurance premiums and increasing rents, making it near impossible to stay afloat under this government. Minister, how many more businesses have to fail before this inept government will put forward a credible plan to bring down inflation and boost productivity?
Thank you, Senator Canavan. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, as we know, and the data is clear, there have been more businesses created under this government. So I know you like to handpick and select your own statistics to try and paint the worst picture, but the reality is more businesses have started, more jobs have been created, wages have got moving, and we have looked at ways to support small business, including with energy bill costs that you voted against, that you cite in your question there, Senator Canavan. What are we doing about energy costs? We're providing energy bill rebates for small business to help them with some of those increased costs. We are dealing with all of the issues, unfair contract terms. We're dealing with those. We've been trying to put forward and have a significant small business agenda, and we will continue to do so because we know that small business are the engine room of the economy, and they have, as I said, been increasing in numbers since we came to government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ghosh.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher. Labor wants Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn. As part of our focus on cost of living support for all Australians, the Albanese Labor government has prioritised wages growth at every opportunity. Minister, how is the government getting wages moving in the right direction, and why can the Australian people always count on Labor to prioritise pay rises?
Thank you, Senator Ghosh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Ghosh for that question and for focusing on wages of Australian workers and the plans that the Albanese government have been putting in place to make sure we get wages moving again after a decade of wage stagnation and a decade of economic policy that sought to keep wages growth low. Creating secure jobs, good, secure, permanent jobs, is fundamental to our government's economic plan, and it's central to householders being able to deal with many of the cost of living pressures they're currently experiencing. Under the Labor government, workers are earning more, with 4 consecutive quarters of annual real wages growth, and keeping more of what they earn with our tax cuts for every single taxpayer. Over the past 2 years, the government has argued for an increase to the minimum wage 3 times. Every opportunity we've had, we have argued for a wage increase through the minimum wage increase process. We've supported and funded increases for aged care workers and early childhood educators, and we've seen average wage growth almost double compared to the wages growth that was seen under the former Liberal government. Wages are growing, inflation is falling, wages have grown in both the public and private sectors, and wages in the private sector have actually grown faster than public sector wages. 1 million jobs have been created, more jobs than have been created in any parliamentary term, and we've seen a record number of women working and working full-time, with more choices available to them. Since we came to government, the average full-time worker is now earning an extra $159 per week, and we have the smallest gender pay gap on record. But we know that there is more to do, President.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ghosh, first supplementary.
As Minister for Women, Senator Gallagher, I'm aware that you've made women's economic equality a core imperative of the government. Today, the Workplace Gender Equity Agency announced that we have once again broken the pay gap record, narrowing the gap to 21.1%, down from 21.7% last year. How has the Albanese government's policies contributed to the important achievement of women's economic inequality, and what does this mean for Australian women?
Thank you, Senator Ghosh. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Ghosh for that question and for focusing on the narrowing gender pay gap. And it is a really important report today. The Gender Equality Scorecard reports that the latest gender pay gap data shows that the gender pay gap has narrowed, this is total remuneration, to 21.1, down from 21.7%. And the report itself from WGEA says that the main driver of the decrease in the gender pay gap in 23-24 was the increase of wages for lower paid workers, in particular aged care, residential services, where women make up the majority of employees, the vast majority of employees. So isn't that amazing? Where you have large groups of working women in low-paid industries, if you try and address their pay levels to appropriate standard, you see a closing of the gender pay gap. Amazing. Never happened under those opposite. Never prioritised women's wages, never prioritised feminised industries.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Ghosh, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, wage growth is back as a priority of the Australian government after a decade of wage suppression by the Liberals and Nationals. Minister, how can Australians give themselves the best chance to achieve future pay rises?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Ghosh for that question. Well, they've just simply got to look at the record, don't they? The record of achievement of a gender pay gap that was stagnating, wages that were stagnating, negative wages growth. And over here, we have, in the space of 2 years, women's average weekly earnings have increased $173.80 a week since May 22, almost $200 a week because of the policies of arguing for wage increases for low-paid workers. I know you hate it. I know you hate it. But the facts speak for themselves. That in those feminised industries where you have a government that prioritises them and their wages, not only will those workers get the right wages and a better deal, you will also see systemic change in the gender pay gap, something that those opposite never prioritised and something that we have as a central feature of our economic plan.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dean Smith.
My question is also to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, can you categorically rule out additional spending in the form of one-off payments prior to the next election, which would pour additional fuel on the inflationary fire and ensure Australian interest rates stay higher for longer?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I can tell you what we will rule out. We'll rule out spending $600 billion on nuclear energy plants that are going to get established in, 20 to 30 years and deliver 4% of Australia's energy requirements. I will definitely rule out that additional spending. Quite a bit of additional spending, and one might think that $600 billion may have an effect on the government's budget, maybe on the spending side. So I can rule out that. That is the biggest threat to the budget. Is this uncosted, lack of detailed plan from Mr Dutton to build nuclear energy plants that will, at some time in the future, provide less than 5% of Australia's energy needs. That is the biggest risk. Well, you asked me about spending on the budget and spending and its impact on inflation. Well, I am ruling that out. Minister,
please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
President, point of order on direct relevance. Senator Smith asked a question very clearly about one-off payments. And while it may be flattering that the government is fixated with the coalition's policies, the reality is the minister has spent more than half of her answer now talking about opposition policies and going nowhere near answering the question asked by Senator Smith.
Senator Birmingham, the minister was asked to rule out additional payments, and I believe that she's yes, that's right. And I believe that the minister is being relevant, and I'm going to invite her to continue, and I will listen carefully. Minister Gallagher.
Well, it might be a one-off $600 billion investment in nuclear energy. We don't know because you haven't told us. I can assure those opposite that our approach going forward will reflect the decisions that we have taken in previous budgets, which is to find savings where we can, to repair the budget where we can. Remember that, $80 billion less interest that we're paying now because we have repaired the budget. We've delivered 2 surpluses which are helping with the fight against inflation, and where there is additional investments required, they will not add to the inflation challenge, as you have seen in the decisions that we have already taken. It is a responsible approach that looks at the short term but doesn't take our eye off the longer term. That is the approach we've taken since October. It is the approach that we will continue with.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dean Smith, first supplementary.
Dr Jonathan Cairns, the chief economist at Challenger and former RBA executive, stated that any stimulus is going to add aggregate demand and that anything that's stimulating spending will make the Reserve Bank's job harder and slow the reduction in interest rates. Minister, does the Albanese government support keeping rates higher for longer by increasing spending in the form of one-off vote-buying payments?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure that Senator Smith is very interested to know that the latest inflation figures show that headline inflation is the lowest it's been in almost 4 years. When we came to office, it was much higher and it was rising. It's 6.1% and now it's 2.8%. We also know that inflation is now half of what we inherited and about a third of its peak. And all of us in this place should welcome that, all of us, because that means that the prices people are paying is less than what we inherited when we came to government, when inflation was rising under you and interest rates were rising as well. Our budget strategy, and I know you continue to misquote the RBA, you continue to misquote them in all of your questions, when they have said that our surplus budgeting is helping in the fight against inflation. We've delivered 2 surpluses, something that you were not able to do in your entire time in government, the first 2 surpluses in 15 years.
Your time has expired. Order. Order. Senator Dean Smith, second supplementary.
Public sector spending reached a record high of 27.3% of GDP in the June quarter, with economists and the RBA now effectively ruling out an early 2025 rate cut and forecasting no cut until at least July, August or even later. Minister, as rates stay higher for longer and insolvencies rise, real disposable income goes
backwards,
Senator
Smith. The time for answering
and our
your
standing of
question
living
has
diminishes.
expired. Minister Gallagher.
I think I got the gist of that, even though it was over time, President. And I would just say, and I would remind those opposite as they demonise public demand, which is what they're doing, that it is an important component of the economy to make investments into public services. We believe in Medicare, we believe in the NDIS, we believe in aged care, we believe in aged care wages, we believe in funding the community sector, healthcare workers properly. We know you don't. You demonise public demand, but we know your demonisation is our essential public services. That's what we think. And so investments are needed in those essential
Minister,
public
please resume your
services.
seat. Senator Ruston, I've just sat the minister down because, quite frankly, I'm over the interjections. When Senator Smith asked his question, I heard one interjection from the right-hand side. The rest of the question was given in absolute silence. The minute the minister stood, the interjections from you, Senator Smith, and other senators increased in volume the longer the minister spoke. So I'm asking you to have the same courtesy to the person who's asking the question to the person who's answering the question. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, President. I will, we see investment in public services as important, but I will remind those opposite that the Governor of the Reserve Bank has on a number of occasions said that public demand is not the main game from her point of view.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Waters.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change, Senator McAllister. With reports yesterday of the worst coral loss in 39 years in parts of the Great Barrier Reef, still the Albanese government is saying no 2035 target will be set until advice is received from the Climate Change Authority. And under the Climate Change Act, the minister has to request that this advice be done. The authority can't initiate that advice on its own. So my question is, has the minister formally asked the Climate Change Authority for advice under Section 15 of that Act on what Australia's 2035 targets should be?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister McAllister.
Thank you very much, President. And Senator Waters did give me the courtesy of alerting me that she'd asked this reasonably particular and fact-based question, and I can draw her attention to the website of the Climate Change Authority, which says this: the Climate Change Authority is developing advice on the 2035 emission reduction targets for Australia's next nationally determined contribution, as requested by the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. And they go on, President, on their website to talk a little bit about how they're doing that, because what they're doing is complex whole-of-economy modelling, policy analysis, consultation and consideration of international trends. Now, the question from Senator Waters seems to suggest in some way that the decision to make this request of the Climate Change Authority is a device of some kind by the government. Senator Waters might recall that the decision to insert such a requirement into this legislation was a decision that was supported by the Greens political party. In fact, it was a decision that we also welcomed. We think it is useful to have an independent, authoritative source of advice and analysis that can assist the government in recommending any future target. And so we are proceeding in exactly the way it was set out in the legislation. We are requesting advice from the Climate Change Authority, and we look forward to receiving that advice, which, as the Minister has indicated on many occasions publicly, he will consider and weigh before recommending any future target. But I think the point is, Senator, that there is a lot of work to do in relation to our existing targets. Those opposite, as I understand it, don't plan to have a 2030 target at all. In fact, some of them are talking about walking away from the 2050 target. Some of them are calling to pull out of the Paris Agreement. We're getting on with climate action.
Thank you, Minister. I'm waiting for order. Senator Waters, first supplementary.
Thanks, President. Overnight, Minister Bowen said, quote, "We must strengthen efforts and deliver our highest possible ambition." And at last year's climate meeting, he'd said, "We stand behind the call for future NDCs targets to be aligned with 1.5 degrees. This is the guiding North Star as countries prepare the most ambitious NDCs." So will Australia's 2035 target be aligned with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister McAllister.
Thanks very much, President. And thank you, Senator Waters, for pointing out that Australia is, in fact, involved in the international forums, playing a constructive role and, frankly, back at the table. And the truth is it matters. It is in our national interest, because if those opposite were actually paying attention, they'd notice that in communities they claim to care about, bushfires are intensifying and becoming more frequent.
Order.
Rainfall is intensifying and causing greater levels of flooding. Heat waves are affecting older Australians.
Minister McAllister, please resume your seat. Senator Wong.
Senator Mackenzie was called by you, took a breath and then interjected again. I'd ask you to call her again.
Senator Mackenzie, I will remind you, I did call order. You and Senator Patterson were interjecting. Senator Patterson kept quiet and you continued on. Minister McAllister, please continue.
Thanks very much, President. Senator Waters points out that we're at the table calling for international collaboration to deal with this challenge because it matters for Australians and, incidentally, it matters for our neighbours in the Pacific. And the approach we take to setting the target will be exactly as we have explained on many occasions and is set out in the Act.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Waters, second supplementary.
Thanks, President. The UK has set the test for the rest of the world by pledging an 81% reduction in pollution by 2035. To be anywhere near that sort of ambition, the Australian government would have to finally confront the oversized contribution that our coal and gas exports make to cooking our planet. Is that something that the Albanese government is willing to face up to?
Thank you, Senator Waters. Minister McAllister.
Thanks very much, President. Well, it appears again that the Greens political party are inviting us to offer and speculate about the kinds of targets we might propose prior to receiving the advice from the Climate Change Authority, because it appears that what you'd prefer is just a speculative process where we pick targets out of the air. What's actually been undertaken is analysis from the Climate Change Authority, which precedes government consideration of any target, which will be announced at the appropriate time. But the truth is, senators, that action is required. And it's required because of the consequences for Australia and for our neighbours if we cannot, as a world, come to terms and start to reverse the warming trends that are causing so much damage to our communities. And we are back at the table, part of the international community, working to forge exactly such an agreement.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. The Albanese Labor government is committed to improving outcomes for First Nations communities. Can the Minister please outline what the government is doing to reduce the cost of everyday essential items and improve health outcomes in remote First Nations communities?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister McCarthy. Come to order, Senator Thorpe. Come to order, Senator Thorpe. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. And I thank Senator Stewart for the question. I know it is one that does concern her deeply. I recently returned home to my community of Borroloola in the remote Gulf region of the Territory, and residents in Borroloola, like many communities, President, face health challenges that are all too common among First Nations people, including diabetes and kidney disease. And like residents in other communities, they have to travel long distances for health care and treatment. During my visit, I was pleased to announce the Albanese government is investing $13.5 million for a multi-purpose community development that will include a renal dialysis clinic. A new renal facility in Borroloola means kidney disease patients will no longer have to relocate to Darwin or Katherine for life-saving treatment. I take this opportunity as well, President, to acknowledge the Mayor of Cairns, Amy Eden, and her delegation who are here. I recently visited the Cairns-based hospital as well in terms of working and talking with patients there so that we could look at setting up some treatment for them at home on the Torres Straits, because we know that diabetes can be managed, if not prevented, through diet. That's why it's vitally important we improve food security for remote First Nations communities. Groceries in some remote First Nations communities cost more than double that in capital cities. Everyone deserves access to affordable, fresh and healthy food. In August, I wrote to manufacturers and producers asking for action to expand remote access to bulk purchasing discounts. The letters ask for prices for 30 core products to be no more than those paid by major supermarkets. And earlier this month, I hosted the Remote Food Supply Chain Industry Roundtable. It was the first time stakeholders in the remote supply chain have come together to identify food security solutions for people in our most isolated communities.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Stewart, first supplementary.
Thank you, President, and I thank the Minister for explaining the Albanese Labor government's action to reduce the cost of food in remote communities and how this is all part of the broader strategy to close the gap. How is the government supporting remote communities to access food all year round?
Minister McCarthy.
Well, thank you, Senator. Thank you, President. Every wet season, some remote communities have road access cut off by floodwaters. Communities like Yarralin had its supply chains cut off for months. Stores were paying $10 per kilo for air freight, adding $20 to the cost of delivering 2 litres of milk. The Albanese Labor government is investing $9.6 million to improve food security for First Nations people in remote communities. The Store Efficiency and Resilience Package will support upgrades for more than 15 remote stores to ensure a reliable supply of nutritious food and essential groceries. We've worked with state and territory governments to identify the remote community stores most in need of immediate support. Funding will support increased storage capacity for both dry and refrigerated stock, so stores can better manage supply chain interruptions. And the funding will also support stores to install backup power stations to save perishable stock and allow continued trading when power supplies fail.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Stewart, second supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. And it is great to hear about tangible outcomes for First Nations people in remote communities. What are the Albanese Labor government's long-term solutions to improve food security in remote communities? And how will these have a positive impact on health outcomes?
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Well, we've heard from remote First Nations communities across Australia, from Gallawinku to Charleville to Yalata and to Bidyanga. Remote communities are asking for reliable access to affordable, fresh and healthy food. We are listening, and we're working with state and territory governments as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations to remove the roadblocks to cheaper, healthier food. The National Strategy for Food Security in Remote First Nations Communities will set out long-term, sustainable solutions to improve food security in remote communities. The National Strategy will identify and coordinate action for remote First Nations communities, and it will improve prices, quality and availability of food and other essential groceries. President, the National Strategy's key objective will be improving the health and wellbeing of First Nations people in remote communities, and I do thank all of those who are involved with this process, in particular all of the stores and the communities.
Order. Thank you, Minister. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. Well, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Gallagher. Yesterday I visited the lawns in front of Parliament to speak to advocates for the many victims of the epidemic of male suicide in Australia. Not a single Albanese government minister, senator or member bothered to turn up. In 2023, more than 2,400 Australian men and boys committed suicide, while the figure for women and girls was 203. In January 2023, the Albanese government halved the number of subsidised psychologist appointments per person. This has affected veterans, farmers, police, health workers and many other sections of our society. Minister, given growing mental health problems in Australia contributing to our suicide epidemic, when will the government restore funding to 20 subsidised psychologist appointments per person?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Hanson for raising the very important issue of the mental health and wellbeing of Australian citizens and the difference, in particular, in numbers of men who are successful with suicide than women, and that has been the case for as long as I've been watching that data, and obviously how we deal with trying to support people who are contemplating suicide, I think is a real focus of everybody in this chamber. It has huge individual cost, obviously, family and friends costs, and also significant costs to the community. I can go through a number of the initiatives we are funding in mental health, and I wasn't aware of that gathering on the lawns of Parliament House yesterday. On the issue that you raised about better access, the issue we found with that program was when it was returned to its normal level of 10 sessions, it was expanded only in COVID for 20 sessions. When it returned to its original level of 10 sessions per person, that it allowed a much greater number of individuals to access it. So it didn't reduce access, it actually increased access because what we saw was that there's only a certain number of psychologists, and if they see the same patient 20 times as opposed to seeing two patients 10 times, that we were able to, well, yes, it's demand-driven, but there is only a finite capacity of psychologists available to provide services. And so what we've seen is that
Minister, please resume your seat. Minister Wong.
Senator Ruston today, President, has ignored your ruling and laughed about ignoring your ruling on numerous occasions. And it is time that she, as a senior member, actually showed the chair some respect.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Ruston, I have called you, and the minute after I called you, you continued interjecting. You are being disrespectful to me, and I'm asking you that when I call you to order, you come to order. Senator Thorpe, you come to order as well. Minister Gallagher, please continue.
Thank you, and I will provide some more information in the next answer.
Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Thank you very much. Advocates at yesterday's event spoke passionately about unjust family law outcomes contributing significantly to the epidemic of male suicide in Australia. The Albanese government's removal of shared parental responsibility from family law has made the system even more biased against men and fathers. Minister, will the government acknowledge the family law system is heavily biased against men and fathers and is contributing to the male suicide epidemic in Australia?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Hanson for the question. And just to finish up on the Better Access program, which I just think it is important, the evaluation found that people with lower incomes and those living in rural, regional and remote areas were missing out on much-needed care, and that's why one of the programs that we are starting through the last budget is to establish a new national mental health service free of charge for all Australians regardless of your postcode, and there was significant investment, and it was particularly to deal with the issue that you raised, Senator Hanson. On the family law matters, the changes we made to family law were not aimed at disadvantaging one parent over another. They were focused on, and this was informed by advice from various inquiries, to have the focus on custody arrangements or access arrangements to be made in the best interests of the child. And that was, I think, agreed through this place. It was not aimed at disadvantaging any parent.
Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
May not be the case, but it's having the impact. The Albanese government has committed considerable taxpayer funding to address women's issues and has appointed an Assistant Minister for Women. The government has also stated on many occasions it is committed to gender equality. Minister, when will the Albanese government show a real commitment to gender equality and appoint a Minister for Men?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Hanson for the question, and she would note from the first national strategy on gender equality that it does include and mention specifically areas where men and boys face particular disadvantage. That is the whole purpose of gender equality. It is not promoting women over men or men over women. It's saying that we all benefit when both gender have access to equal opportunity. That is the whole nature of having a strategy on gender equality. And I can tell you that the assessment, particularly around health and particularly around mental health and access to health services, is looked at through what services are targeted and best designed to support men, and how do we reach men, particularly in relation to health services, because we know that men are more reluctant than women to reach out and access health services.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Duniam.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. The CEO of the Australian Energy Market Operator, Mr Daniel Westerman, was recently asked at a Senate inquiry if he could guarantee that electricity prices would be lower under the government's energy plans, and he responded, and I quote, "I can't guarantee that." No.
Senator Ayres.
Can the minister guarantee that the government's energy policies will lower the actual ongoing electricity bills for Australians, as Mr Albanese promised?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Wong.
Well, I tell you what I can guarantee. I can guarantee that energy prices under us will not include the $600 billion that you will spend on the single most expensive form of energy that there is. And I can also confirm that Australian households would have been worse off if you had got your way and prevented the energy bill assistance that the Labor government put forward from flowing to Australian households and Australian small businesses. And I can also confirm that your $600 billion nuclear scheme will take decades to build, will add $1,200 to power bills and provide 4% of energy needs. So the facts are, Senator, you can come in here and talk about energy bills. You can come in here and talk about energy bills, but you propose more expensive energy.
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Duniam.
I asked about the government's policies making power prices lower, not our policies that they don't even know about.
Senator Duniam. The minister, order. The minister is being relevant, and I'll continue to listen carefully. Minister Wong.
Well, it is clear that there is one party working to ensure we deliver cleaner, more reliable, cheaper energy to Australians. There is one party working to ensure we assist Australians to the extent we are able with higher energy costs. And there is another party that doesn't want Australians to be assisted, another party that wants to spend $600 billion on the most expensive form of energy there is, and now they want to make a political point about energy costs. Do you want to know why energy bills have been spiralling? In great part, some of it is international circumstances, but in great part it's because you and Senator Canavan and others didn't allow Senator Birmingham and others in your party to put forward an economically responsible transformation of the energy system.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. When your colleagues come to order, Senator Duniam, and on the right. First supplementary.
Thank you, President. When pressed on why Mr Westerman could not guarantee lower power prices, he stated that, and I quote, "The integrated system plan, it doesn't refer to whether it's cheaper or more expensive for that wholesale component." Minister, how much more do Australians have to pay for electricity to meet the government's plans for an 82% renewable energy target by 2030 and also net zero emissions by 2050?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Wong.
I'm happy to respond to that, and I'm happy particularly to point out the net zero emissions by 2050 is actually—
Order.
Oh, well, I'll take that interjection too from Senator Ante. Or was that Senator Canavan? Did you watch the doco? Because what we've noticed is, despite the fact that Mr Dutton and the coalition are for net zero by 2050, all of those who helped kill the 22 plans are now up to it again. Senator Canavan saying very clearly, why do we remain committed to this radical net zero agenda? Senator Matt Canavan, part of the group, along with Mr Joyce, who's destroyed 22 policies that the Liberals tried to bring forward, and now are trying again to walk away from net zero. That is why we are having to work to fix up your mess after 22 plans and less supply.
Thank you, Minister. Just a minute. Senator Canavan, I have repeatedly called you. Senator Canavan. Senator McKenzie, I am now standing. Senator Canavan, I called you three times, and you completely ignored me asking you to stop. That is disrespectful and disorderly. Senator Ayres, you also interjected, and so did you, Senator McKenzie. I should not have to stand to get order in this place. Senator Duniam, second supplementary.
Thank you. We will try a third time to get the government to talk about their energy policies if they have any. Will the Albanese government ever deliver on its promise for an ongoing $275 average electricity bill reduction for Australian households?
Thank you, Senator Duniam. Minister Wong.
President,
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Colbeck, I was just on my feet because of the disorder in this chamber, but somehow that completely went over your head. You immediately began interjecting. I'm asking all senators on my left and my right not to interject. Minister Wong.
Thank you. First, what I can indicate to those opposite is that we will do what is most economically efficient, which is to deliver the cheapest form of energy that we can. The cheapest form of energy that we can. And unlike you, Senator Birmingham, thank you for continuing to interject, we will help with people's energy bills in a way you refuse to. You voted against cheaper energy bills. You voted against energy bill relief. So anyone who wants to understand the hypocrisy of what has been put to the government in this chamber by those opposite can only look to the vote where they voted to ensure you did not get energy bill relief on your bills, that Australians did not get that. That is what Mr Dutton voted against in this chamber, here and in the other place. And now they want to pretend that they care about cheap energy.
Thank you, Minister. The time for order. Order. Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator McCarthy. There have been more delays to the controversial Middle Arm gas and petrochemical hub on Larrakia country, which your government is pumping billions of dollars into. Engagement with Larrakia custodians has been a sham. Larrakia families and First Peoples across the territory have made it clear that there is no consent for this ecocidal project, which will destroy sacred Larrakia country, harm health and poison the oceans, waters, lands and air. As the Minister for First Peoples, how are you making sure that this project does not progress without the free, prior and informed consent of the Larrakia people and other First Peoples impacted by this gas hub?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator, for the question. Given that Middle Arm is a focus of one of my colleagues, I will touch on specifically the First Nations element of it, President, and of course I'm sure there will be more to say in regards to Middle Arm. But in terms of any First Nations organisation or First Nations people to do with construction or with development, there is always a process in each state and territory jurisdiction, Madam President. It is not for the Commonwealth in this particular instance to focus specifically on the Larrakia. It is of the Northern Territory Government in terms of the discussions and decisions they have.
Minister
but
McCarthy,
in terms of,
please resume your seat. Senator Thorpe.
Point of order on relevance. This is about free, prior and informed consent. How do you get that?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Your question was much broader than that, and the minister is being relevant to your question. Minister McCarthy.
Yes, thank you. And so, as I was about to say, what we have in the Northern Territory is the 4 land councils, President, whose roles under the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act, their role is to consult with each of the language groups across their jurisdiction. So with the Northern Land Council, they cover the northern part of the top end. You have the Central Land Council in the central part of the territory. You have Anandili-Aqua over on Groot and the Tiwi Islands. So it is important that through the Northern Territory Aboriginal Land Rights Act, that whether it's Larrakia people or whether it's people in the western area or the eastern area with the Yolngu, there is a process in which they go through to provide their consent.
Thank you. Senator Thorpe, first supplementary.
You are the Minister for First Peoples and a Senator for the Northern Territory, yet you're willing to stand by and let your government push ahead and pour billions of dollars into destroying country. When will you properly represent First Peoples in the Territory and call for your government to redirect the $1.5 billion towards projects that will help the community and protect country and health?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. As a Senator for the Northern Territory and certainly as Minister for Indigenous Australians, I will always do my utmost to represent First Nations people across the country.
Senator Thorpe, second supplementary.
Senator Thorpe, what they
Senator
say.
Thorpe, wait until you're called.
Did you call me?
Senator Thorpe.
Do you want me to sit?
Senator Thorpe, you are not in a debate with me. I simply asked you to wait until you were called. Senator Thorpe. Senator Thorpe, come to order. Senator Thorpe, second supplementary.
President, your government won't stop the destruction of country. You won't introduce new cultural heritage legislation. You won't comply with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You won't touch Truth or Treaty, and you won't stop the ongoing genocide against our people. Given all of that, why do we even need a Minister for Indigenous Australians?
Thank you, Senator Thorpe. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Well, I certainly would completely disagree with Senator Thorpe. There is a great need for a Minister for Indigenous Australians in this country. to push through on closing the gap, to meet with state and territory ministers, which I did on Friday, to meet with the Coalition of Peaks, who do their utmost to improve the health and livelihoods of First Nations people, to negotiate within Cabinet and with my colleagues with their respective portfolios on how we can reach agreement through the national agreement, which was actually signed by both the opposition and the government in every single jurisdiction. Madam President, that's why we need an Indigenous Australians minister, to ensure that all of these
Senator
things
Thorpe,
progress
order.
through, that there is the ability to have the traineeships
Senator
to ensure—
Thorpe, Minister McAllister, please. Minister McCarthy, I'm sorry. Minister Wong.
Senator Thorpe continues to interject. I ask that you call her to order.
I have been calling the senator to order. Senator Thorpe. Minister McCarthy, please continue.
And I'm certainly incredibly proud of the Indigenous organisations that do their best for First Nations people across this country.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Urquhart.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Skills and Training, Senator Watt. We know fee-free TAFE is changing lives. Within the first 3 months, more than 118,000 people had enrolled in free TAFE courses, with hundreds of thousands more over the past 18 months. These enrolments have been in areas like care, early childhood education and construction. How is the Albanese Labor government bringing costs down so Australians can get the skills they need for the jobs they want? What are the key barriers to delivering this support to Australian students?
Minister Watt. I did call you. It's order. I did call you. Please continue.
Well, thanks very much, Senator Urquhart. And while we will very much miss you in this chamber, we know you will do an outstanding job as the future member for Braddon. I also take the opportunity to acknowledge the Far North Queensland delegation who are here. Great to have some more Queenslanders in this chamber as well. Now, we know that Australians are under the pump at the moment, and that's why we are delivering cost of living relief and helping more Australians get a job. That's exactly why Labor is making it free for more Australians to study at TAFE so they can access high-quality, affordable training. Free TAFE is delivering the training that Australians want and the skills they need to get ahead for free. Yesterday, I attended a ceremony here celebrating the Australian Skillaroos, the best apprentices and trainees from around Australia competing on the world stage at the World Skills event in France earlier this year. But shortly after yesterday's event, the Deputy Liberal leader, Susan Lee, snuck away to the Coalition caucus room where they chose to turn their backs on these TAFE students, announcing the Coalition will oppose Labor's free TAFE bill. Peter Dutton's Deputy Liberal leader went further when she spoke in the House yesterday where, wait for this, where the Deputy Liberal leader said, quote, "It's a key principle of the Liberal Party. If you don't pay for something, you don't value it." Let me repeat that. Mr Dutton's deputy leader says the Liberals believe that if you don't pay for something, you don't value it. How unbelievably arrogant of the Liberal Party to say those sort of things. She went on to say, quote, "So if you're told your TAFE is free, all you have to do is turn up. If that's all it is, but you haven't paid for it, you don't see it as something that makes a difference to you in your life. You don't see it as something valuable." I have never heard such arrogant, vile sneering from someone looking down their nose at those working-class Australians who are trying to get ahead. If the Liberals believe that apprentices and trainees don't deserve free TAFE, well, Labor does.
Answering has expired. Senator Urquhart, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Since June 2023, more than 500,000 Australians have enrolled in free TAFE courses. Despite this, I know the Liberals and Nationals have described free TAFE as wasteful spending. Why is it important that free TAFE is enshrined in legislation, and what would be the consequences of failing to do so?
Thank you, Senator Urquhart. Minister Watt.
Well, thanks, Senator Urquhart. You've really got to hand it to Mr Dutton's coalition, because it is them who called free TAFE wasteful spending. It is them who say that Australians don't value something if they don't pay for it. No Labor government will ever call TAFE a waste, and I'm proud the Albanese Labor government is locking in free TAFE, making it permanent nationwide, and so are the working-class Australians who are taking up those free TAFE places to get ahead in life.
But the Liberals and Nationals say that you don't value something if you don't pay for it, that you should pay more to go to TAFE. So what else do the Liberals say that Australians don't value because they don't pay for it?
Senator
What
O'Sullivan.
else will Mr Dutton make Australians pay for just so they can value it? Will Australians pay more to see a GP under Mr Dutton, just like he tried to do last time he was the Health Minister? Will Australians pay more to access the free NDIS, just so they can value it? Australians are beginning to realise exactly how arrogant and reckless Mr Dutton is, and we'll make sure they remember it.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Senator Urquhart, second supplementary.
1 in every 3 free TAFE places have been taken up by people in regional communities, and 6 in every 10 enrolments have been women. How is the Albanese Labor government's investment in free TAFE supporting people across Australia to get high-quality skills our country needs, and what challenges has this cost of living support faced so far?
Minister Watt.
Well, thank you, Senator Urquhart. Well, obviously the biggest challenge we face in delivering more free TAFE to Australians is the sneering, arrogant view from Liberal Party members and senators that if you don't value something, if you don't pay for it. Now, if the Liberals believe that the diesel mechanics in Mackay taking up free TAFE don't value their training, well, Labor does. If the trainee nurses in Devonport don't value their training, don't value their courses, well, Labor does. If the Liberals believe that apprentice carpenters in Nowra don't value their training because they don't pay for it, well, Labor does. Labor will continue to deliver the free TAFE courses that working-class Australians deserve, that they are using it to get a pay rise, that they are using to get a step ahead in life. We will not cop the sneering, arrogant, looking down the nose attitude of the Liberal Party wanting to keep people in their place, just like the Liberals always want to do. Free TAFE will stay under Labor. It'll go under Peter Dutton and the Liberals.
Thank you, Minister. What? Order. Order. Senator Rennick.
My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. The 1937 Banking Royal Commission recommended the central bank should always control the volume of credit in the system. This wise policy saw housing ownership reach record levels after the war until the mid-1980s, when Paul Keating recklessly reversed this policy by lifting foreign capital controls. This saw foreign debt held by the 4 major banks increase from $8 billion to almost $800 billion by 2008. This doubled the price of houses relative to income, lifted household debt to record levels, forced 2 parents back into the workforce and lowered Australia's education rankings. Will the Labor government reverse this reckless neoliberal policy and use capital controls to limit household debt to sustainable levels and increase housing affordability so that future Australian generations can afford to buy a home?
Thank you, Senator Rennick. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. No, the government isn't planning on reforms such as outlined by Senator Rennick. Our focus on housing affordability is on the supply side. That is the area of pressure which we are experiencing in the housing market right now. There are simply not enough houses to match the demand for houses, and we do believe the government has a role to play to ensure that we are delivering the right type of housing for the demand that's out there. And so that does involve making sure that we've got funded services that dealing with homelessness and people in needing of particular support in that sector. Then in the social and affordable housing sector, the community housing sector, making sure that there is accommodation and suitable projects happening there. Then looking at how we can support renters through rent assistance and a big increase that we've put in there. And then beyond renters, we're looking at how do you support people into home ownership. So through our Help to Buy scheme, which is stuck in this Senate, but which would support tens of thousands of people into home ownership, with the government providing the necessary support there, and ensuring that we're working with the states and territories to unblock all of the barriers and the bottlenecks that exist on the delays in infrastructure and enabling works to get housing developments open. So that is the plan that we have, Senator Rennick. I accept it's not your preferred plan, but that is the plan that we have been working on for the last 2 years since we came to government. We do believe there's a role for the government to intervene and to be actively involved in supporting the areas of demand in the housing system, but we would prefer the path that we've gone on, which is focusing on supply. And it would be great if the Senate would support some of those bills that have been locked in here for way too long.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Rennick, first supplementary.
Australians don't want foreign social media companies controlling their free speech. Yet that is exactly what happens with our banking system, whereby the government allows domestic banks to borrow unsecured credit from foreign banks with no controls in relation to earnings capacity or security. Will the Treasurer take responsibility for the volume of credit in Australia rather than allowing it to be controlled by foreign central banks?
Thank you, Senator Rennick. Minister Gallagher.
Well, we have a highly regulated banking system in Australia. It is highly regulated, it is well capitalised and it has functioned well, particularly in times of crisis where we have seen failures in other economies, particularly of big financial institutions. We have not seen that here because of the capitalisation they have, but also the highly regulated environment that they operate in. We believe strongly in a competitive and profitable banking sector. We believe it's good for the economy and believe that the regulations that exist now are appropriate.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Rennick, second supplementary.
There are two types of capital, debt and equity. Companies issue new equity all the time against income-producing assets. Will the Treasurer, using Australian sovereign equity in its untapped wealth, create an infrastructure bank to provide capital to state and federal governments to fund nation-building dams, roads, rails, ports and power stations instead of using foreign debt?
Thank you, Senator Rennick. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Rennick for the question. We certainly believe the Commonwealth has a role in nation-building infrastructure. That's why we have a very significant infrastructure program that Minister King is rolling out, and we do have a role to play in water security, in national highways and other important projects. We believe the way that they are being funded right now is appropriate. It's funded through the budget and there's always more demand than we can meet through that, but we wouldn't be looking to establish a fund such as the one Senator Rennick outlines.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.